I want to come back to what you're doing in Citrix, but first of all, Mohammed, so you are the new economy, literally. I mean, it's like new, and I think your story, which we heard about the Hult Prize and getting it started now, is just a classic. But why don't you tell us a little bit about, that whole, this idea of creating a new class of jobs. Where does it come from? I mean, is it entirely new? Does it come out of some other? Just a little bit more about the business model and how you plan to find the talent for it.
Yeah, for sure. Assalamu alaikum. I was actually born in Jeddah, and I grew up in Saudi Arabia for 12 years, so it's really nice to be back. To tell you a little bit about my view on this, I think it begins with a basic factual view that the vast majority of jobs in the future are going to come from startups. And that's a profound change because, 50 years ago, the cost and barriers to starting a company were very significant. Today, you can start a company in an afternoon with like a couple $100. And this is why we're seeing a proliferation of startups around the world. And my story is a very classic example, and hopefully, something that can inspire optimism about what's possible. Because I am a very unlikely entrepreneur. I was training to be a neurosurgeon, and when I was in medical school, I came across a business competition called the Hult Prize, which is considered the Nobel Prize for social enterprises. And the idea was to inspire students to build a business that can address a major global challenge. And in 2013, that challenge was food security. Our planet is rapidly growing in population and appetite, but it's also shrinking in resources with which to produce food. And that creates an opportunity such that if you could find a way to produce a lot more food using a lot less resources, you could have an incredible competitive advantage in this new world we're all embracing. And so our insight was, if we can to identify a source of protein that is abundant in the world and widely consumed, but nobody's figured out a way to produce it commercially at scale. And of course, for us, that was insects. And ultimately, we ended up defeating 10,000 companies from around the world. We won this $1 million Hult Prize. It gave us the seed capital to start our business. Of course, it also meant that I had to sit down with my, immigrant Egyptian parents and explain to them why I'm going to drop out of medical school to farm crickets. But what it gave rise to was a new industry. I mean, what we're building is not a new company within a pre-established framework of an industry. We're actually building the very scaffolding of a new industry of protein production that is fully automated indoors using climate-controlled agriculture, big data, robotics. And what that means is we're not just creating direct new jobs. So whether it's entomologists that we're hiring out of school, not to figure out how to kill insects, which is what typically most entomologists are trained to do, pesticide control, but rather to figure out more efficient ways to increase yield for human or animal nutrition. So there's direct jobs we're creating in data and AI and machine learning, but there's also indirect jobs we're creating. So now, for example, there's new regulation that has to be established around insect consumption. And so that means that in the FDA and the USDA, there's new jobs that are being created to deal with this. It means there's new jobs being created in academia. We actually just launched the Canada's first research chair at the University of Laval on insect agriculture. And there's now a new wave of new researchers who are hiring graduate students and starting new lines of research as a result of the work we're doing. So I'm incredibly optimistic about the future of job creation. And in fact, my concern is not so much, and this is my personal view, but I think that there's a misplaced moral panic around the idea that there's going to be this massive unemployment issue. I don't think the issue is it's not going to be that we won't have enough jobs. I think it's that the gap between the jobs of the future and the skills that people have today is massive. And I think that if we can redirect that concern, instead to focusing on how do we reskill people to bridge that gap, I think we'll have an incredibly, incredibly bountiful future.
Well, just picking up on your example, and I'm going to go back in this order all the way back, just focusing on one question, this question. So do you think that those jobs will be found by educating people or by attracting them and letting them develop in your job itself? In other words, will you find them in the marketplace, or will you have to do it yourself?
In our case, we had to do both. There are some jobs that we were able to source readily, albeit there's a a customization aspect because of what we do and the specificity around it. But in many cases, we've actually had to train people. I mean, there is no such thing as a cricket farm technician, right? There isn't off-the-shelf automated cricket irrigation systems. We have to build these things from scratch. I think what was exciting for us, though, is the recognition that learning curve, even if it feels very steep, we have an incredibly motivated and very hungry, group of young people who are coming into the workforce. And I think what's tied hand in hand with that, and I'll turn it over to you and Christian, is the understanding that businesses, one of the biggest competitive advantages they have to have now is something deeply fulfilling and purposeful that employees are drawn to. In fact, it is no longer attainable and it's no longer sustainable for companies to have a mission or a vision that doesn't directly benefit the planet and the future in some way. And I think so long as you have that in the DNA of your organization, people will be willing to make the sacrifices, learn, commute, get up that learning curve, and you'll have an outsized advantage when it comes to attracting talent.
Christian?
Yeah, I mean, I have a pretty interesting view on this, and it largely speaks to the problem that BJ talked about, which is, in the tech industry, we have far more jobs than people. And I think many times we're drawn towards formal education as the only way into that. And I think if you try and make that equitable across the world, not everybody has the same opportunity. And yet the next generation of individual are literally born digital. We talk about digital immigrants, digital natives. You look around at the next wave of the workforce, and they are born technologists. So I think maybe what we need to do is balance formal with semi-formal and then literally on-the-job education, because we have to realize that the steps for our generation to get into technology don't really exist in the way that the new generation comes in. So I think the problem that we're trying to avoid is this sort of gap between the jobs that are available and the jobs that can be filled. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to sort of look at this in a slightly different way. Formal education is incredibly important, of course, but as I said, not everybody gets the same opportunities. And I think we're doing a disservice to younger people if we don't think about that in the terms of maybe apprenticeships or on-the-job skills that are equally important.
Makes sense. BJ?
I agree with it completely. I think the challenges we have in education are some of these categories of jobs will come from very specific skill areas, like cybersecurity. So I often, think of, did my biology class help me, with my cybersecurity skills? And so in some ways we have to rethink how we educate also, and target specific areas to accelerate the ability for human capital to take advantages of the opportunities that are out there. The other thing I would just say is the pace of change just continuously accelerates. And in any role, whether you're a digital native or old like myself, you have to continuously learn. You have to embrace continuous learning to stay out in front of this so we can marry resources to opportunities.
It just gets faster. BJ, you have literally the last, sorry, Gonzalo, you have literally the last word.
Sure, yeah, no, I mean, I fully agree with them. But I really believe that education and online education is absolutely critical. And in our technology space, there is no room for failure. I mean, you make a mistake, the consequences are very severe. So, I mean, when you have to develop emergency COVID application for citizens, as we did here in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, you cannot fail. And the people working on it, they cannot fail. They have to be properly educated. When you have to, I don't know, to manufacture a car and you need 1 million lines of code that has to be tested, you cannot fail. So yeah, education, absolutely critical. Yeah.
Yep. Well, gentlemen, the future of work. Onwards to a great and exciting panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.